We're looking for comps today on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Who is this year's Tristan Casas? Who is this year's Julio Rodriguez? All that and more coming up on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Fred Zinkie. It is a first half, second half podcast today. We're going to be talking about finding comps. We're going to be trying to find who is this year's version of that. It's a fun little exercise we can do. Fred Zinkie, what's going on? How are you, my friend?
I'm great. I think if you're in fantasy, you're always looking a little bit ahead. So with the All-Star break coming up, I'm hoping that this podcast will do two things. We can look at maybe specific players who might be this year's version of some interesting players from last year, and also maybe give us all some hope that if you're sitting halfway down your standings, like a lot of interesting things are going to like a lot of big changes will happen in this going forward, and all we have to do to see that is just look at what happened last year.
Yeah, and so let's jump right into it here. Tristan Casas is one of the guys that was the inspiration for this topic. A young slugger who had a blah first half, breaks out in the second half. First, what he did last year, 225, 9 homers, 727 OPS. Last year in the first half, second half, 317, 15 homers, 1034 OPS.
That's right. So you've got a slugger in it wasn't like a huge prospect. We're not talking like a James Wood type prospect, but a notable guy. And we've been kind of waiting for him to break out. It didn't really happen in the first half. So the theme is who will be this year's version of these players. And obviously we're going way out on a limb. Like it's hard to predict a guy who's going to raise his OPS 300 points or anything in the second half. This guy's not going to do exactly that, but I decided to go with Micheal Busch in the sense that he hit 6 homers in April, and then the power has been MIA since then. He's still hit for average. He's had a high BABIP, but he's still hit for average since then. But when you look at Micheal Busch's power numbers in the minors, they were really consistent. And if I haven't given up at all on him as a power hitter in the majors. So I think he's someone where the Cubs are kind of out of the race. He already plays a lot. He'll probably keep playing a lot. Maybe he's someone who could hit a good amount of home runs in the second half.
Yeah. I kind of like it there. And it could be this year's Tristan Casas, and this is going to be an answer for a lot of these categories. It could be this Tristan Casas could be this year's Tristan Casas also, as a possibility there. I'm wondering, we've seen a little bit of a tiny breakout from Andrew Vaughn of late. I wonder if that's something that could maybe hold, something that maybe gets built off of. But I mean, that's like a 3.5 year string of disappointments too. So maybe that's not necessarily proper, but trying to find a few others there along that sort of profile there.
How about this fun question? We've talked about 3 players already: Andrew Vaughn, Micheal Busch, Tristan Casas. Who's the oldest of those 3 players?
You're going to surprise me and tell me it's Busch.
It is. And who's the youngest? It is Casas is the youngest.
Okay.
So Casas is the youngest. Yeah. Micheal Busch is actually the oldest of those 3 players. I thought I would have guessed off the top of my head, for sure it was Andrew Vaughn, just because he's played in the majors so much. But that just goes with Andrew Vaughn having been a high draft pick, right? Who got to the majors early. So, So when you say Andrew Vaughn, after I say Micheal Busch, and someone be like, "Oh, we already know what Andrew Vaughn is," blah, blah, blah. Micheal Busch is kind of new and interesting. Well, Micheal Busch is a 97 birthday and Andrew Vaughn's a 98. So you're right. Maybe there is still time for Andrew Vaughn, who I drafted on a lot of teams this year and really regretted it in April.
Yeah.
But on the ones where I hung on to him or dropped him and picked him back up, like you said, he was great in June. 6 homers, 20 RBIs, 337 batting average.
I got another suggestion for this category.
Okay.
Vinny Pasquantino. 11 homers so far in the season. Barrel rate is about the same as last year. Exit velocity is up. The pull percentage is up too, up to 47.5. That's something I've been kind of more watching because of Julio Rodriguez, who we're going to talk about later. But I like seeing that. I don't think the ballpark will necessarily help him so much, but I think there's another level for Vinny. I think that's someone I would try to go trade for now and think that maybe there'll be a second half power surge out of him.
Yeah, that's totally possible. Plenty of fly balls too. Yeah, well, like it might not be one of these guys, but these are all good examples. Like I said, like if your team is kind of languishing in the standings, like if you have a couple of these players, maybe one of them takes off in the second half and like Casas last year hits, 15 or 20 second half home runs. So yeah, I think Vinny Pasquantino is a really good example too. Same age, by the way, as Micheal Busch. He would be tied for the oldest, if we're just going by birth here, tied for the oldest player on the list that we just talked about.
Yeah, I like that there. In the comment spot, by the way, folks, go ahead and let us suggest.
Yeah, if you have other people,
and we'll dive into those players too as we go through these categories. All right, moving on. Who is this year's Julio Rodriguez? Underwhelming star who gets back together in the second half. Last year, 249, 13 homers, 721 OPS. In the first half, second half, 308, 19 homers, 941 OPS. Who is this year's Julio Rodriguez? And why is it that everybody thinks this too? Why is it that it's Julio Rodriguez?
Well, I sent this to you a few days ago, and now he has the quad injury, which has me like pausing a little bit on this. Like the quad injury might not amount to much. I just hope it doesn't. Even if it doesn't amount to much as far as like an IL stint, I hope it doesn't slow him down on the base paths, because that would really prevent him. That would, if he was more Julio Rodriguez at the plate, it would be offset. If he already has 18 steals this year, which is pretty good. So, like we want the power to come back, but we want the steals to keep coming. So hopefully the quad injury is no big deal. He did pinch hit on Sunday. So, but then he was removed from the game after he pinch hit. So I don't know. Like I feel like
literally, by the way, he was removed from the game for a pinch runner, and then he got thrown out arguing ball strikes on somebody else. He was removed from the game entirely there. But sorry,
I know. So one of the more interesting game logs, he was also hit by the pitch. So came in, didn't record a plate appearance. Did record a plate appearance. Sorry, didn't record an at bat. Was hit by the pitch, and then was removed, and then was ejected. So that's about as interesting of a game log probably as he'll ever have. Anyways, the fact that he played Sunday kind of does make me think that they're not worried about an IL stint, because if they were, I don't know. It was a really close game when they brought him in, obviously. So, but then it took away the chance to backdate it. So I think he'll probably be okay. You've talked a lot, and so have a lot of people, about how he's just not pulling the ball as much this year. So I'm going to say that if we've all talked about it, that probably the Mariners and Julio
one would hope. Yes.
Yes. And then since he is considered one of the more talented players in the world under the age of 25, still 23 years old right now, that he can probably maybe he can do something about that at some point and pull the ball more. We'll see. But it seems like if you're just looking for someone with a clear path of like, hey, just change this one thing and you could be way better in the second half, he's an easy shot at it. But like, I don't know. It feels kind of cheap just picking the same guys last year.
Yeah, it does. So as a pivot, who's another guy you had in mind?
So I mentioned Pete Alonso, and maybe this is just me doubling down on the fact that I drafted Pete Alonso in a lot of places, but Alonso's like Rodriguez in the first half of last year, like he was fine. Like he hit 249, he had 13 home runs, 721 OPS. Like he wasn't good. He wasn't what you wanted from Rodriguez, but he also wasn't like a Corbin Carroll this year where you're just like, oh my gosh, this guy, I don't even know if we should play him. Pete Alonso is kind of like that. He's hitting 240, so his career average is 250, so he's not that much below it. And the power is there. Like he's got 18 home runs. It's not terrible. Still puts him up in the league leaders, but it's not what he usually is. Like his 780 OPS is about 80 points below his career OPS. Pete Alonso is usually a 40 plus home run hitter, and right now he's on pace for about like 33. So 33, 34. So he's got room to grow. So I see the Mets had that offensive surge. They've cooled off, but not completely. Like they're doing okay. They look like they'll probably try to continue to make the playoffs instead of trading him.
That's unfortunate. Yeah.
Maybe.
For us, I think, ballpark wise.
Maybe. Yeah. In the sense that maybe he could have wound up on a team like the Yankees or someone like that, looking for a first baseman with a better park to hit in. At the same time, I guess our absolute worst case scenario would have been somehow that the Mets fell out of the race, still didn't trade him because maybe they had goals to sign him. And then he just plays on a languishing, team down the stretch. So at least he's on a team that's still trying. I just feel like the weather's warming up. The rest of his lineup has been pretty solid lately. So there's enough around him. He's been an RBI machine his whole career. He still, to me, is on the short list of players who could lead the majors in second half homers and second half RBIs.
Absolutely. And the thing is, with Alonso too, like he's got 18 homers this year, 10 home, 8 away. He's actually slugged a little bit better at home this year. Career over the last 3 years, it's slightly more in favor of away. He has so much power that really the park doesn't affect him that much. But I mean, then again, if you put him in a really, it depends. I guess the answer would be it depends where he lands. You put him in Houston with the Crawford boxes. Ooh, all of a sudden, and that's a team with a clear need. That's why I suggested Houston, because they don't have a first baseman. It's really weird right now that an elite team, Houston, maybe they're not playing elite this year, but they don't have a first baseman. The Jose Abreu experiment fizzled so badly there. They're using Mauricio Dubon at first base more often than not. Just shows how desperate they could use Alonso. Not too many teams need a first baseman, but Houston is one.
Very true. Is there any chance still that he does get traded? Like, I know the Mets have climbed up to the point where they're totally in the race. But I don't know. Like, is there any chance that he does get traded? Like, if the Mets they lost to the Pirates yesterday, like they should have a pretty good week. They're at home all week. They're at home against the Nats and the Rockies. And then they come out of the All-Star break in Miami for 4 games. Like, that should kind of set them up to stay in the race. But I mean, right before the deadline, they go to the Yankees, then they host the Braves, and then they host the Twins. So is there any chance that he does still get traded? That maybe if they have a bit of a crummy couple weeks here, fall maybe a little further back, maybe they're 4.5 games out of the wild card, and then ownership is like, hey, we got a good offer here from the Astros for Pete Alonso. Maybe we should take it, or someone from Pete Alonso. I don't know. I still think he'll stay, but I guess it's still possible that he gets traded.
I would say, I mean, they'd have to collapse with an easy schedule, and that's the thing that, if they don't take advantage of the easy schedule, I can see it. They've won 4 out of the last 10. They're not exactly rolling right now.
No.
But yeah, I mean, they've got these critical games coming up. Home games against the Nats, which is directly against less about the division, more about one of the other wild card foes. But then, like you said, the Rockies and Marlins coming out after that. I mean, you got to take advantage of that. They're 1 game under 500, 2.5 out. That's the problem. Is the wild card bubble is so weak in the NL that it takes a lot for a team to kind of concede that they're sellers. Like, I think my Reds are probably up against it. Probably, are unlikely to win the wild card spot, but yet they're only 4.5 games out. They've been extraordinarily unlucky, and more importantly, they don't have a ton of inventory that they want to trade because they feel like they've been snake bit injury wise and want to bounce back next year. Their core is still young. So who are they going to trade away? Maybe a pitcher, but they're not going to trade Lodolo, Hunter Green. They're not going to trade Andrew Abbott. So who are they going to trade? Alexis Diaz? Okay, I guess. Frankie Montas, maybe. I mean, sure, but what are you going to get for him? I mean,
sure, but how much you're going to get for him?
Yeah. So that's a good. Speaking of Montas, yes, he got pushed back a day because Lodolo coming back, and these All-Star game weeks, week before the All-Star game, you see a lot of changes off in there too. Teams are trying to play some games around that or bring guys back, so that happens a lot. But I just don't see too many guys that are going to get dealt. I mean, Jonathan India, maybe someone might want to trade for Jonathan India, especially with McLean coming back. I guess I could see that, but yeah, that's one team. So it's really kind of intriguing to see. Okay, who are the sellers? Who are the buyers here? I love trade deadline discussion. I always do, always have. But anyways, noteworthy stuff there. All right.
Yeah, and just quickly jumping back to the Mets, they do have all these 30-somethings. Like if they did want to sell, which they probably don't, Nimmo, Martinez, right? Like Pete Alonso's almost 30. Like Jeff McNeil, Bader, like they could sell some veterans. I don't think they will. Anyways, we can go on to the next.
Like a Sean Manaea type or something like that would actually
for sure
claim a lot of interest, especially with the way Manaea has been rolling lately. All right, moving on to the next category. Who will be this year's Cal Raleigh? Catcher becomes a game changer, hitting for elite power in the second half. 11 homers in the first half last year, 19 in the second half.
Yeah, so Cal Raleigh certainly didn't come out of nowhere to hit. Like, this isn't like a catcher who just like, nobody wanted him at all or anything. But Cal Raleigh, yeah, like I said, like he was okay power hitting catcher in the first half, and then holy smokes, 19 home runs as a catcher from your fantasy catcher in the second half. So I picked Mitch Garver, who I have on some teams and has frustrated me a lot in the first half. However, he's not hitting for average, but that's the thing with Cal Raleigh too. Often, Garver, since I think it's June 6th, so just barely over a month, has hit 7 home runs. So the power stroke has come back. He drove in 17 runs in June. He's already driven in 5 in July. He's hit for average a little bit in July, but we're talking about 5 games. So I'm still not sure if he can be counted on for average, but Garver's someone who's hit for a lot of power in stretches in his career. He has a 31 homer season that he did in 311 at bats. Last year, 19 homers and 296 at bats. So he's someone who can be very powerful over stretches. I don't know, maybe it took him a while to adjust to playing in Seattle, which isn't a great place to hit. But either way, the power has been back lately, and he's someone who maybe could hit for a lot of power in the second half, and in some leagues is still out there on the waiver wire.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say Yainer Diaz, only 7 homers in the first half, but I think the potential remains there. I think that is someone who has had that ability before, hit 23 homers last year. I don't see a whole lot of change in his ability. So, I'm going to go with Diaz. Dennis D in the comment says Francisco Alvarez. I like that suggestion as well. Again, another Met. And he was hurt, obviously, but the power has always been there for him. So I like that suggestion quite a bit too.
Jumping back to Diaz, I strongly considered him. And then what pushed me off was his ground ball rate is just so high and his fly ball rate is so low. So this year Diaz's fly ball rate is 27.8%, which is like really bad. Like last year was 36.6, which is still low. Yeah. So he managed to hit 23 home runs last year with that 36.6% fly ball rate. This year it's even lower. So the power's down. I think Diaz is someone who could be really valuable in the second half. Like if I was going to go short list of catchers who could hit 300 in the second half, he would be near the top. Like he'd be right up there on it. He'd just have to change that ground ball rate. But this is the whole point of the exercise, is finding someone. For my Mitch Garver, he needs to make a little more contact, and then it all comes together. For your Diaz, he needs to change his launch angle a bit in the second half, and then it all comes together. So I think those are both good picks. Alvarez, obviously another good pick. Like there's clearly power there. And we got away from him a bit in the first half because he was injured, but 25 homers last year.
Exactly right. All right, we're going to move on to stolen bases, but first, quick note from our friends at DraftKings and their PickSix app. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? I think I can eat that slice of pizza under 30 seconds, or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter. If you have, then you're going to love PickSix, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose the more or less of a stat, like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings PickSix app and use code RWPicks. New customers play $5 and get 50 in PickSix credits. That's code RWPicks for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in PickSix credits only on DraftKings PickSix. The crown is yours. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawal PickSix credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at picksix.draftkings.com/promos. All right, Fred, let's move on to our next category. That is stolen bases. We're going to talk about what CJ Abrams did last year. First half, 14 bags. Pretty good. Second half exploded at 33 stolen bases. Was a big league winner if you had him over the second half last year.
That's right. So trying to find someone who could maybe post a really high second half stolen base total who didn't post one in the first half. I didn't go with maybe someone quite as Abrams. Like I feel like the player I'm going to pick isn't quite as experienced as Abrams, but I looked at Wyatt Langford, who's starting to become like a really hot commodity here in fantasy baseball. Like he's even the last few days since I first sent you my picks for this episode, like he's done last night 2 hits and a home run, the day before 4 hits. Like I was like, no, Wyatt Langford, you're not as cool of a pick anymore for me as you were a
Right.
few days ago. But
That Sunday
anyways,
night game was huge too.
totally. So
Yeah.
he's playing great. He hasn't stolen many bases though. This year, he actually has 249 at bats and only 7 steals. I did look at the average sprint speed list a few days ago. At that point, he was 11th. The guys don't move much on that once the season's rolling. So he's somewhere around there, somewhere around a top 10 player in baseball on average sprint speed. The Rangers are kind of hanging around on the fringe of the wild card race. I think then that can cut in 2 different ways, both of which would be favorable for Langford. One would be the Rangers have to pull out all the stops to win every game they can right now to climb back in the race. So let's get aggressive and let this guy, who we know is the fastest player on our team, steal bases as much as he can. The other one would be the Rangers fall out of the race. So let's just focus on the development of our players. So let's take this really fast young player like Wyatt Langford and just let him steal bases as much as he can in the second half, just to, to keep playing around with getting jumps and timing and all those things, so that next year he's the best baseball player possible. So either way, whichever that way that goes, I feel like, I've crafted a couple narratives where he could be a guy who surprisingly steals, maybe not the 33 that Abrams stole, but maybe steals 20 in the second half or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's I've been fending off trade offers for Wyatt Langford, at least in the one league where I have him. One guy keeps on trying to, give me like a 4 for 2, like 4 good players for your 2 awesome players is the way I look at it there. And I've been, I see like I have depth issues, but it's also a thin league. So I'm like, no, I'm just going to ride with these guys. But I think it's interesting. I also look at like the 90 foot running splits leaderboard. I think that sometimes is an interesting one. Ellie De La Cruz tops the list, but like Pete Crow Armstrong's another name that, okay, maybe he sees more playing time in the second half. He had a ton of bags in June already, so it's kind of cheating to say him, but I think he's interesting as far as that goes. Sal Frelick, team that runs a lot already to begin with in Milwaukee. He's another guy that could kind of rates high on that list as well. So maybe, not necessarily a hidden source. I mean, we already know Frelick's stolen base ability, but maybe he starts to get on base a little bit more often in the second half and he takes that next step. That's often what happens with these guys is it's playing time and it's also they start to get it at the plate too.
Yeah, I think the Pete Crow Armstrong one is really interesting, just in the sense of he's been a lousy hitter this year, which is limiting, obviously, his chances to play. If the Cubs fall a little bit further out of the race, all of a sudden it doesn't really matter. Maybe they just say, hey, the guy's 24 years old, and he's fast. Let's just put him in. Who cares if he hits or not? Like, we're not going to make the playoffs anyway. So, and then maybe he steals like crazy in the second half. So I think all Crow Armstrong needs is a little more playing time, a little more contact, and he's off to the races, so to speak. So, I think those are both really good picks.
Yeah. So it's always fun about that, to try to find those guys. I mean, we all remember like how John Birdie lifted us in categories before in the past. You're trying to find that guy, because we all have those, or just Starling Marte and his, goes to the A's and he actually starts running more, believe it or not, somehow. Yep. It's always incredible about that. All right, we're going to move on to the next category here, and that is who's this year's Alex Verdugo or Nolan Arenado, a veteran that falls apart in the second half. I thought you laid it out pretty well in the in the outline, Fred, about what they did. Verdugo last year, 290, 57 runs, 57 runs is pretty crazy for
the
first
half
last
year. Wild, eh? Yeah.
Yeah, 38 RBI, 817 OPS. Second half with Boston, you can see why he's a former Red Sox. 225, 24 runs, 16 RBI, 635. Utterly fell apart. Nolan Arenado, first half, 19 homers, 283, 850 OPS. Second half, 7 homers, 241, 663 OPS. I guess that was kind of a hint to us that, in the case of Arenado, that beware a little bit that you might not be getting the same player that you think you are.
Yes, absolutely. Neither of these players have completely bounced back this year. Like Arenado's, his OPS this year is 693, so way down from last year. Verdugo's been like okay from a fantasy perspective this year, but that's partially just because he plays for the Yankees. and their offense has been really effective. But he has a 697 OPS this
He's
year.
the same guy. He's not very good. He just
He,
has had a couple of high-profile good games.
he has, and he actually hasn't even hit well. Like the easy narrative would be, oh, Yankee Stadium, blah blah. He actually hasn't hit well in Yankee Stadium. He's hit better on the road, but just that lineup is one of the bit more high-scoring lineups in baseball. If he just keeps an everyday role in that lineup. He has found a way to hit a few more home runs. Like he is on pace. His career high is 13. He's on pace for about 18 or so this year. But basically, just by being an everyday player in that lineup, he's going to be around 80 runs and 80 RBIs. So if he keeps that, but in real life, he hasn't bounced back. Like he hasn't been a good player this year. So looking at who could be a player who, maybe I don't love my pick for this one, but who could be a player who bottoms out, like someone who just previously was in your roster, kind of a set and forget player, and bottoms out in the second half. I picked Cody Bellinger. Like I said, I don't love it. This one I found harder than the optimistic projections. Like everything we've done so far has been positive on the podcast, but this is the first negative one so far. Bellinger actually hasn't been very good so far this year, but he hasn't fully bottomed out. Like you could still start him. He's hitting 266, 9 home runs, 4 steals. Like it's not good, right? But he hasn't totally bottomed out, but we've certainly seen Bellinger bottom out before. And I just thought maybe Cubs falling out of the race. It's been a bit of a lost year for him. Maybe he just fully bottoms out in the second half. He has the new contract, so he's already set for next year. I don't know. I struggled with this one to pick someone out. I think this one's hard because you got to take someone who's playing pretty well and say that all of a sudden they're going to start playing poorly.
Right.
Yeah, I picked him. I could have picked Dalton Varsho, but he's already started playing poorly. He would have been my pick like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. What I think is you start looking, I think maybe this is where you start dealing with the expected stats. And then you kind of see like the difference, and that's
kind of where I got Bellinger from.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the thing is, we have that. We do have that on our site. And of course, Savant has a lot of stuff with that too. You can kind of dig in and look at some of the advanced stats, and you can look at the the splits on that a little bit there. You can find your guys on that. Sometimes just expected batting average, sometimes it's expected slug. And we can do that with pitchers too. Expected ERA obviously is a big one there.
Yes, absolutely. Another one, when I looked at expected stats, so that's kind of where my Bellinger came from, is his XBA was about 30 points lower than his actual batting average. Luis Rengifo is another one that I could have put on the list. I don't really love being a hater on him because I think he's a good story this year. The multi-position eligibility is nice. At the same time, like the expected stats don't like him at all. They've got his expected batting average about 50 points lower than his actual batting average. And same thing with the slug, about 75 points lower. So they're saying that he's not an improved hitter this year, that he's kind of the same guy he always was. So he's been way more valuable this year for 2 reasons. One, he's got a way higher BABIP, and because of that he's hitting 315. And the other one is he's running way more, so he's got 22 steals. So but he's not hitting for as much power as he used to. So there is a scenario where Rengifo goes back, hits like 250 in the second half, steals a few bases, but is otherwise not very valuable.
Yeah. That's a good one. And I mean, we'll see what happens. The flip side is, he is going to run like crazy if given the chance, but these teams that, are falling apart, the Angels are a good one like that. We'll see. And the Cubs might be falling apart too. The veterans might taper off. They might get dealt. They might get benched a little bit more. Not that, Bellinger's not going to get benched. He's not that guy, but yeah, I mean, you can see it there a little bit there. You probably, a good example might be last year's version, might be like someone like Anthony Rizzo. And then of course we found out that Rizzo got hurt there too. So again, unfair a little bit there. Pitcher wise, someone like Albert Suarez is in over his head a little bit there. You're going to make sure you're going to spot him here and there. Trying to find guys that are rostered already that on the pitching side of things here. What do you think about Reynaldo Lopez? His xFIP is 371. His current ERA is 171. That's a pretty big gulf. Obviously, he's been a huge factor for teams that are doing well right now.
That's right. So I looked at him, like later we're going to talk about some pitchers, and I looked at him. I didn't pick him. I looked at him because some of his like other stats, his FIP, his xFIP, are much higher than his ERA. That being said, I don't think anyone really thinks Well, actually, that's not true. I shouldn't maybe put all these thoughts in everyone else's head. I don't think a lot of us really think that Ronaldo Lopez is a 171 ERA or even a 2.5 ERA. Like, I think if you have Lopez and you got a 3.5 ERA in the second half, you'd be totally happy with it.
Sure.
And I think that's possible. Like, I don't see him necessarily just like falling apart. The Braves will support him really well. They have a really good bullpen. And even though their offense has been disappointing, like there's still a lot of good pieces there. So, yeah, unless he runs into innings trouble, that would be, he didn't fit any of the parameters when we talk about pitching later for what I was looking for exactly, but that would be an example for him. Like, he hasn't thrown this amount of innings in the major since 2019. So we can't say he hasn't done it. He did it in 2019 and he did it in 2018. Although certainly not as successfully as he's doing it this year, but he hasn't done it in a long time.
And my bad. I knew you had another section on pitchers. I should have held off on that. But
I can name one more hitter, though, who I strongly considered. Isaac Paredes looks like he's the same guy. Like, he's on pace for almost 30 homers after he hit 31 last year. He's hitting 266 after he hit 250 last year. So it looks like if you drafted Isaac Paredes, like you still got the same guy, but he's another guy where the expected stats really don't like him. His XBA is 223. His X slug is 100 points lower than his slug. And I mean, if we took Isaac Paredes right now and gave him that X a batting average, like a 220 something batting average, and if we took that slug and all of a sudden he had hit like 10 home runs this year, and you'd be like, oh, you got at the All-Star break, he got a 10 homer 225 batting average. Like, this guy's waiver wire material. So he's someone where I think we've settled in now to like, this guy's good. Like, 30 homers last year, 20 the year before, and just 331 at bats. Like we're kind of settling into like, okay, Isaac Paredes, he's good. He's like a 30 homer type player. Doesn't help your batting average, but maybe he won't kill it. We'll see. Expected stats say be careful with him in the second half.
Right. And, reality might settle in too with the Rays. If they, they've already traded Aaron Savali. Now they had Shane Baz waiting in the wings, and they're going to have Jeffrey Springs eventually too. So they're not necessarily selling off, but they could. Junior Caminero is starting his rehab process now after a long absence with his quad injury. He's down at, I think, their rookie complex. So he'll be back to playing games. And once he does that, then he could get the call. And that's going to create some tension in terms of playing time. So that Paredes might get caught up in that. He might be moved to be, he might be we're going to trade our veteran, move in the younger player who's just as good sort of guy. So that's also a possibility too. That might be good for Paredes. It might be bad. We'll see. All right. We're going to move on to the next category. Before we do that, though, quick note from our friends at Home Run Forecast. Certain weather conditions can certain weather conditions lead to more home runs? Of course they can. The atmosphere can affect how far a baseball flies by 20%. Home Run Forecast measures the weather conditions at a ballpark to tell us if the atmosphere is good or bad for ball flight during a game. An index value that rates the air is created for each game and ballpark and is displayed on a scale from 1 to 10. Home Run Forecast premium site offers index values by the hour for each game, 24-hour forecasts, wind direction and speed, and even whether the roof will be open at certain stadiums. Home Run Forecast is offering a special for the rest of the baseball season. You can get access to the premium site for the entire season for only $28, a savings of nearly 30%. Go to homerunforecast.com/RotoWire right now to sign up. Also, we are on the Blue Wire Network. Here are their ads. All righty. Thank you, everybody, for your indulgence there. Let's jump right in back to this concept here. Who is this year's Freddie Peralta? And that is a guy that can skilled starter, underachieved in the first half, thrives in the second half. Last year, 4.70 ERA, 1.30 WHIP in the first half, dominated in the second half. If you had him, you knew that. 2.81 ERA, 0.88 WHIP.
Yeah, so I felt like this one was one of my easier picks, and maybe it's because I've mentioned this pitcher in my trade articles a couple times this year. Now, that being said, if people listened to me and traded for him, they'd still be saying, wait a minute, Fred, like when are the results going to come that you've been telling me about? All the expected stats say they should be there, but it's Pablo Lopez. He's a pretty obvious one. Like the 116 strikeouts to 22 walks is ridiculous in 99 innings. Like, that's amazing. He's had not terrible BABIP luck, 311. He's had poor timing. His strand rate's low. this year. Like the 5.18 ERA just doesn't match anything else. Like he had pretty consistently been like a mid-threes ERA type pitcher. His FIP's still there. Like I feel like he could have at least go back to being that in the second half. And maybe we get lucky and we get the counterbalance where in the second half he's a 3.1 ERA pitcher, or a 3 ERA pitcher, and that brings the ERA down over the season. And we're like, yeah, first half was terrible, second half was awesome. He's somewhere in the middle. I just feel like his luck has to change at some point soon.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're absolutely right about that. I think that another guy that might fit under that category might be Kenta Maeda. Lesser returns, obviously, because he's been so bad, but he shouldn't be like a guy that's got like a 6 ERA. He should be a guy that's got like a 4 something ERA. Bobby Miller probably also falls under that category too. Someone that might be running a little bit on the unlucky side. There's some other stuff going on there too that might, it's obviously health has been an issue for him too. And that kind of has an impact on his stats. I'd say Blake Snell's another one coming back this week. I think that's another guy that has that potential to be someone really good in the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Blake Snell was one of the first pitchers I thought of. I felt like he was just, because the injuries were part of the first half, that I decided to go with someone where they weren't, like where it's just pure performance based. I thought about Kevin Gossman because there's another guy who he's more of a veteran than these guys like Lopez and Peralta, but he's someone who in the first half has been uncharacteristically poor and also has a low strand rate. Like I said, I looked at strand rate a little bit because it does factor into your ERA. Obviously not your WHIP, but it does more factor into your ERA, and it's just the sequencing of hits. And it is something that like, it shouldn't settle at one number for every pitcher. It obviously depends how good, if you're a good pitcher, you're more likely to strand your base runners than if you're not. But when some guys get a strand rate that's just way out of whack with how they usually do, it'll probably correct itself at some point. Fun fact on strand rate, by the way, 3 of the 4 worst strand rates in baseball right now are all pitchers for the Cardinals.
Interesting.
Lance Lynn, Miles Michaelis, Sonny Gray.
Interesting. Now, one of those is not like the other. Sonny Gray is getting strikeouts, and we expected good things out of him, better things out of him. Lance Lynn isn't a put the ball in play sort of guy, though. Although he's a put the ball in the air sort of guy, and I always feel like that is like, okay, he got good home run luck or bad home run luck? And he's coming off that outing over the weekend that just destroyed him too. But it is interesting. Do the Cardinals perhaps have bad defense, bad bullpen, or things like that?
It's a really weird one. It's almost like an anomaly. Like those 3 pitchers do not have terrible BABIP luck overall. Like all of them have a BABIP around 290 to 300. So like pretty close to major league average. So it's like Sonny Gray, for example, has pitched great. Like he's been really good in fantasy this year. He's got a 3.30 ERA. His FIP's actually a good half run lower than his ERA. So there's some evidence there to say, that there's something to this strand rate, and that maybe he should be even better this year than he has been so far.
Yeah, sometimes I like to look to see the difference between earned runs and total runs allowed.
Yep.
To take a look at that, and see if maybe like the Cardinals are, outliers in that, and maybe or if it's just the particular. Just that those particular pitchers or something of that nature there too. So we'll see about that.
Yeah, a couple other ones I could have mentioned. Dylan Cease, same thing, where all of his ERAs is 4.21. All of his expected ERA estimators are about a full run lower than that. And another one, I couldn't pick Tyler Glasnow because he's actually been really good so far, but he's another one where low strand rate and all of his estimators are about a run below his actual ERA. So it's suggesting that he could be even better in the second half. When I was comparing to Peralta, it needed to be someone who was bad in the second half. I still think in trading leagues, going all the way back to Lopez, he's someone to go after because I just think that 5.18 ERA will really stick out in the eyes of the person who owns him right now. And you can like they're not going to give him away, but you can be like, come on, I'm trading for a guy with a 5.18 ERA in the middle of July. I think there's at least a case there to buy low on him.
Yeah. By the way, I had to look up the Cardinals. They've given up 53 unearned runs, and as far as I can tell, that's as big a gulf as I've seen out there. I haven't seen a bigger one. I'm kind of just eyeballing it.
Yeah.
So there might be a team out there that has more. I think the Mets have 51, but point is they've had a lot of bad defense. So that has a lot to do with that luck. The Marlins have allowed 47 unearned runs. Let's see.
White Sox 51. I just looked that one up.
So
that would make sense.
Still in the lead. But yeah, White Sox. Oh, they're bad in so many different
in every way.
Yeah. It's a rough look there, but league average is about 36. So the Cards are definitely on the way high end of that. If they're not the leaders, they're very close to being the leader. So that explains that a little bit.
Yes,
all right. Let's move on to the next topic here. Who will be this year's Lucas Giolito? And by that, we mean a starter who's playable in the first half and destroys a team in the second half. First half, 3.45 ERA, 1.14 WHIP. Pretty good. Second half, 7.13, 1.58. I remember those trade deadline trades did not work out very well for Mr. Giolito.
No, definitely did not work out at all. This one, I don't know. It's hard to pick someone who's pitching fairly well so far this year and is going to have a 7 ERA in the second half. But I picked Jose Berrios, who, again, all of the estimators have said all season that he's been way over his skis. His FIP right now is 4.99. His strikeout rate is down this year noticeably. This is the worst strikeout rate of his career. He's managed to work around it, and on the surface, it looks fine. 3.76 ERA, 1.13 WHIP. But when you see a FIP of 4.99, now I said in our notes that this may be cheating because he's already started to regress. But he hasn't bottomed out. But last start, 6 innings, 4 runs. The start before that was 5 innings, 5 runs. Before that, he had a good start, but before that, 5 innings, 5 runs, and before that, 6 innings, 4 runs. So he's been giving up a lot more runs lately. He's had 2 in out of his last 5 starts. 2 of them have been 1 strikeout starts.
Wow.
So, and all of those starts are 5 innings or more. So he's not putting guys. He also has a 3 strikeout start in there. He's struggling to put guys away. He's been giving up home runs. So he's given up a home run in his last 7 starts, at least 1. In 3 of the 7 starts, he's given up 2 home runs. In those 7 starts, he has 3 games with multiple walks. It just seems like how about this? He's hit a player with a pitch in all of his last 5 starts. It just seems like we've got some, it's happening. Bad things are happening. Yet somehow in those last 5 starts, he's got 3 wins. And I don't know. I feel like everybody's looking at Berrios still and thinking, yeah, you just plug him in every week. ERA in the 3s, WHIP of 1.13. You just plug this guy in every week. He'll have a good start, a bad start, whatever, but you'll get what you want in the long run. I'm not so sure in the second half. If he had a second half ERA of 6, that wouldn't surprise me. And the Jays are going to sell off, and they're not going to support him. They already haven't supported their pitchers well, but they've supported him okay. He's got 8 wins. The Jays will not be putting out a really good team in September.
I was just going to ask, is Berrios one of those guys that gets sold off?
I don't think so, because I think that the Jays, because this management team is so under the gun, he signed a 7-year extension.
Oh yeah.
He's completed 3. This is the 3rd year, so he's got 4 more years after this. That's not necessarily a terrible thing, because this extension I think is reasonable. So I think a team would be like, oh, okay, I can get him for 4.5 years. But I don't think this is where the Jays want to go. I don't think the Jays management is willing to go full rebuilding, because this management team's been here for 6 years, something like that. If they go full rebuild here, that looks really bad. So I think Berrios stays. I think the pitchers who have club control stay, and that's how because they're going to have to build next year's team around them. So
Chris Bassett is a free agent after the 2025 season. Is he a possible trade candidate?
I think he's at least possible. It would depend on what. I have a hunch that they're going to keep Berrios, Bassett, Gausman, and that's going to form the basis of next year's rotation. Hopefully, Ariel Rodriguez is in there, and then who's had some good starts lately, and then they need one more starter. But I mean, come on, it's July. Everybody needs a starter for next year. So. Right. Manoah maybe comes back. Maybe they sign another guy. I'm
think
not
he's
optimistic.
2026 at best.
Yeah, I think so too. So
I'm going to throw out one other name. He's not a veteran. He's a second-year player, but it's Andrew Abbott. After great outing yesterday against the Rocky Road. I just think he's one of those guys that's been over his skis all season long.
Yep.
If you recall, he melted down in September last year, just wore down. I think there's a possibility of that happening again. The weight of the red season kind of crushing him a little bit. I think I'm happy he's doing well. I think he's overachieved, and I think he's a danger. I would not recommend trading for him.
Yep, I totally agree. I put him right near the top of my Yahoo article for 2-start pitchers this week, and I just said, because in Yahoo he's about 50% rostered, and I said this is the most obvious 2-start week I've maybe ever seen.
Rockies and Marlins. Yeah,
and the Rockies also their first game after a week at Coors. That's always getting them right away. First game after a week at Coors, and then the Marlins. Unbelievable. So sure enough, he does what he needed to do yesterday, and shuts out the Rockies. But in the grand scheme, I totally agree with you. His start before that, he held the Yankees to 1 run, 2 strikeouts and 4 walks. In the start before that, he held the Cardinals to 2 runs. 2 strikeouts and 6 walks. So, and then there's some other
dodge and raindrops. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's some other ones in there too where it's like the Berrios. When I look at it, I'm like, oh, here's some home runs. Oh, here's some walks. But somehow he didn't give up very many runs. So I think it's very Berrios-like, except even without the track record Berrios has. So yeah, I agree with you. I think Abbott on a smaller scale could end up being someone. I think you got to be very careful. In Yahoo leagues, I actually just recommended people use him for the 2-start week and then drop him, no matter how well this week went. If he does another 7 scoreless against Miami, just drop him, because those leagues are more shallow. There'll be someone I don't want someone to get married to this guy, because I think he'll drag them down at some point.
Yeah. So looking after the break for the Reds, they go at Washington, then at Atlanta. So if Abbott, you're hoping he pitches at Washington, but it might be at Atlanta, which is, I think, far worse, or it might be both, depending on how they structure it there. But either way, I get it. It's a little bit tougher for him there. All right, let's move on. Last category, who is this year's Adbert Alzolay, reliever who takes a hold of the closer job for his team. Last year, Alzolay had 7 saves in the first half, 15 in the second half, was a big part of teams that did well down the stretch.
Yeah, so this one I tried to look at, obviously the easiest way someone will take hold of their team's closer's job will be that the closer gets traded or the closer gets hurt. And but I wanted to look at someone like Alzolay who could maybe do it on merit. So I picked Jeff Hoffman, who's been one of the best relievers in baseball so far this year. He's been sharing saves with Jose Alvarado, and he's been on the short end of that. So he has 8 and Alvarado has 13 so far this year. But the Phillies went this huge gap without a save. They didn't have a save from June 14th until June 30th. But then when they finally did get some save chances again, and so Hoffman's had 3 of the last 4 saves. Mm-hmm. I can't read too much into that. We're talking a lefty and a righty, so we're talking matchups and usage and things like that. So I can't read too much into it. All I know is that Hoffman's been so good. That the Phillies, they could totally trade for a closer, but they really don't need to. They could just make him the closer for the second half. And they do have enough lefties that they could continue to mix and match. That's quite likely. I just know he's pitched so well that if Alvarado has a hiccup somewhere, has a bad week, like Paul Sewald just had, we might talk about it here before we're done today, and something like that happens, maybe Hoffman just grabs hold and just runs with it.
I like that. I like that suggestion. The problem is, you're going to have to go trade for him. He's rostered pretty much universally.
Absolutely.
He's been so good.
For sure.
And guess what? The guy or gal that rosters Hoffman already knows that. So you're not going to get Hoffman on the cheap. Probably not.
I think when I was thinking about trading, I thought maybe you can get him almost as a bit of an add-in where you're like, hey, this guy's useful, but he's not really his team's full-time closer. So, you want this guy from me. How about this? I'll take this guy, but you got to throw in Jeff Hoffman. And maybe you can get someone to do that, just in the sense of you can always grab more relievers off waivers. He's not a full-time closer. And then maybe he works his way into being one.
Yeah. Another closer related note, and this is going to be our last thing because I got a little bit of a hard out as it turns out. But Paul Sewald blew another save last night and gave up a 2-run homer to do it. That's 3 straight bad outings. homers, 4 homers allowed, I think now, or 3 homers allowed in the last 3 games. Pretty rough stretch for him. He was so amazing earlier. What's our level of worry with Paul Sewald?
It would be so easy for them to pivot back to Kevin Ginkel right now. Like, it would be so easy. I was doing the quick math on this. Like, Kevin Ginkel's given up 1 run in like his last like 15 outings. Like, it would be so easy for them to give Sewald a break and maybe even just pivot back to Kevin Ginkel for this week and just say like, hey, you're not like, we'll get back to you after the All-Star break, Paul. And like, just we'll pitch in a low leverage situation or 2 the rest of this week. So I'm a little worried. If I have Sewald, like, I don't care how the rest of this week goes. We've got a half week coming up. If Ginkel's on waivers in my league, I'm going and getting him.
Yeah, I agree.
I will pay a little bit of fab. I will waste 40 or 50 bucks or something just to get Kevin Ginkel on my bench for the rest of July and see how this whole thing plays out. In fact, if I had Sewald, my best thing would be for the Diamondbacks to almost not even get a save chance the rest of the week. This whole thing dies down a bit. I'll grab Ginkel while everything's quiet over the All-Star break and just to be safe, but I'll waste a bit of fab on him.
I agree. And then I think the play beyond Ginkel is Justin Martinez, but I think they prefer him in a multi-inning role. I think Martinez is really good too, though. That's something to watch
for sure. Ginkel's just so obvious in the sense of the ratios are really good. And,
and the role he has already and what he did when Sewald was hurt, all that applies.
Yeah. But Sewald was doing so good. This one came really, and I know you have a fair amount of Sewald, if I remember correctly.
I have him in labor with you. I only have him in 2 leagues, but I have him in the league with you.
This one just came totally out of nowhere. Like 1 run in his first appearance of the season after he came off the IL. And then again, just quickly eyeballing about 15 scoreless outings in a row. 15 or so in a row. And everything looked good. No home runs. Obviously no home runs, scoreless outings, no walks, like plenty of strikeouts. And then all of a sudden,
makes me think he might be tipping pitches or something. Like the velocity's not off. He doesn't throw especially hard, but it's not off. So
3 different teams too, like the 3 blown saves: Dodgers, Padres, Braves. So it's not like one team just nailed them like 2 days in a row kind of thing. All right. Yeah. I don't know. I would worry enough, like I said, that I would give 40, 50 or something if I had the fab.
And if it turns out Sewald stabilizes, it wouldn't hurt to, just roster Ginkel through the All-Star break, because we got the short week next week after the All-Star break where you're not going to have 8 starters possibly. You may want to just have the ratios anyhow. So
you grab Ginkel, you use them in the half week, and then maybe you just hold them for 1 more week. You're going to want guys at the trade deadline. So maybe you're just like, hey, I'll hold Ginkel for the rest of July. And then at the trade deadline, if Sewald's worked things out by then I've got a ready-made guy to drop to pick up someone who's interesting when all the trades go down.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap up our first half. Second half, we are off next Tuesday. So when you hear from us, it'll be 2 weeks from now when Fred and I are back together on the airwaves. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks everybody who was live in the comments. Appreciate you all for that. Thanks for listening to RotoWire, and take care.